Chapter 55. Third Year. The Man Who Cried Wolf. Christmas Day, 1973. Remus's odd late-night conversation with Philomena had caused him to re-evaluate his anxieties about girlfriends. His ability to comfort her had stirred no particular feeling of chivalry or affection, only a mild sense of relief that he'd got her to stop crying. He definitely had no desire to get that close to any other girl. He thought about Narcissa for the first time in a while. Remus had secretly thought that Narcissa was the most beautiful girl he knew, before she'd dyed her hair anyway. She had a regal sharpness which appealed to him on some base level. But even she was made foolish by love, risking her own life, in fact. The sight of Philomena sobbing in her nightie only cemented in Remus's mind the revelation that love and relationships were not worth the misery. He had enough pain in his life. Let Sirius and James work it out for themselves. But for the time being, Remus felt very intelligent for having come to this realization so early in life. He had probably saved himself a lot of needless stress. Christmas morning was as wonderful as it had been the year before. Even Philomena perked up once she saw the gifts under the tree with her name on them. Remus was able to enjoy the immense satisfaction of handing out his presents, and Sirius and the Potters were all suitably pleased and thanked him profusely. He himself received a chess set from the Potters, which was perhaps the most expensive thing Remus had ever owned, and bought just for him, not second-hand, along with the usual assortment of sweets and practical jokes from the Marauders. It was a very good haul. Sirius looked a bit nonplussed at breakfast, as everyone else wolfed down their smoked salmon and scrambled eggs. "What's up with you?" James asked, mouth full. Sirius shrugged. "Nothing from a dromedare," he said quietly. "I didn't think I'd get presents or anything, now that she's got the baby, but I thought maybe a card. I sent her one." James swallowed and patted his friend's shoulder. "Owl might just be flying late. You know how the post is this time of year." James had received a brand new broom for Christmas, and as soon as breakfast was finished, all three boys headed straight outside to test it. Sirius had his own broom with him, and Mr. Potter suggested with an arched eyebrow that Remus take James's old one. "Yeah, have it if you want, Moony," James nodded enthusiastically. "To keep." "Thanks." Remus took it, unable to say no in front of James's parents. Goodness knew what he was supposed to do with it over summer. Try explaining that one to Matron. James and Sirius spent the rest of the morning showing off, and Remus spent it hovering, just skimming the ground with his toes, trying to read his book and look like he was enjoying the broom. He hoped Peter had received his gifts from them, and wasn't having too bad of a time with his own family. They were called in by the Potter's house elf Gully, who was dressed in a festive tea towel and had a sprig of holly tucked behind one ear. It was almost lunchtime, and the house smelt deliciously of roast beef with all the trimmings. "Upstairs, washed and changed, the lot of you." Mrs. Potter shook her wooden spoon at them. "I've had Gully set out your things." They washed and dressed quickly, stomachs growling, as the wonderful smells from the kitchen wafted up the stairs. Just as they began to make their way down, there was the telltale crack of apparition outside the front door. Sirius tensed again, and Remus, one step behind him on the staircase, gripped his shoulder in a way that he hoped was comforting. Sirius turned around and looked Remus in the eye, giving him a gentle smile of appreciation. It was quite un-Sirius-like, but it felt good. The bell rang, and they both turned back to it, James running forward to open the door. A couple stood in the entranceway, a young man and a woman holding a bundle in her arms. He had a mop of fair curly hair and was rather stockily built. She was taller and more slender. As they stepped into the light of the hallway, Remus sucked in his breath. She was the spitting image of Sirius's cousin Bellatrix. "No!" Sirius gasped, starting forward, a smile bursting on his face. "Sirius!" The young woman grinned back, and Remus relaxed, seeing that it was not Bellatrix at all. This woman had the same wildly curly hair as her sister, though it was a much lighter shade of brown. It had to be a dromedare. She passed the baby in her arms over to the man next to her, presumably her husband, Ted, and stretched out her arms to pull Sirius into a huge hug. Remus watched with fierce jealousy, and not a little guilt. He had never seen Sirius so embraced by anyone, let alone a member of his family. Remus made his own way slowly down the stairs, as Mrs. Potter entered the hallway now, smiling widely, looking very pleased with herself. "A good surprise, then?" she asked, as Sirius shook Ted's hand and tentatively patted the baby's head. "You did this?" Sirius stared at James's mother in wonder. "Effie was kind enough to invite us." Ted smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Pleased to meet you, Sirius. Nice to meet someone in Dromedare's family." Come in, come in!" Mrs. Potter ushered the gathering into the hall. They all followed her towards the dining room, Remus last of all. A dromedare was the polar opposite to the rest of the Black family, or at least those Remus had met so far, though she was as strikingly beautiful as the rest of them, with the same piercing eyes and biting wit. She was full of laughter and merriment. Ted clearly adored her too, and hardly seemed to mind that she left him with the baby most of the time. Dora was the strangest infant Remus had ever seen, though, admittedly, he had not met many. She was as cheerful as her mother, with a gummy grin. Her wisps of hair changed from purple to green to blue with each moment, which everyone else seemed to find cute rather than bizarre. Before sitting down to eat, they were joined by several other guests, old family friends of the Potters, including, much to Remus's excitement, old Darius Barebones. "A toast!" Mr. Potter raised his glass rather tipsily at the end of the meal. "To friends, old and new." "To the Potters!" A dromedare raised her own glass. "Protectors of outcasts and defenders of black sheep everywhere." Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. "I think I must be the most outcast," Sirius said happily. "I'm a Gryffindor after all." "To Gryffindor!" Mr. Potter called out from the other end of the table. Only the Gryffindors toasted. A dromedare narrowed her eyes at Sirius. "Think so, little cousin. Try marrying a non-relative." "I'll have to," Sirius responded, as Gully cleared away the plates, and Mrs. Potter fetched them the pudding. "After Sissy's wedding, there aren't any black women left." "There's Dora." "Excuse me," Ted said, protectively covering his daughter's ears. "Could we please get through her first Christmas before arranging a betrothal?" "I'm teasing." A dromedare leaned over to kiss them both. "Dora can marry anyone she likes when she's old enough, and I can say with absolute certainty that it won't be anyone at this table." Everyone laughed again. Remus eyed Darius furtively. He was looking as merry as Mr. Potter, his face glowing red from the fire whiskey he'd been knocking back. Once the pudding was extinguished, served and eaten, crackers pulled and terrible jokes read out, the party adjourned to the living room. Mrs. Potter, Philomena and a dromedare went upstairs to change into their party dresses. Mr. Potter smoked his pipe, and Ted settled Dora down for a nap. The boys settled into a game of Snap, before Darius and Mr. Potter wrangled everyone into a round of charades. Remus had never played charades before, let alone magical charades, which involved a lot of red and gold sparks, though that may have just been high spirits. In the evening, more guests began to arrive, and the house was soon full of music, laughter, and pleasant chatter. A dromedare and Sirius appointed themselves DJs, rifling through their combined record collections and alternating blasting Slade's Merry Xmas Everyone and I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day by Wizard. "They're actually called Wizard, though," Sirius kept telling everyone earnestly. "And just listen to it." Even Philomena forgot her melancholy for a few hours, getting up and moving to the music along with James, who was now just about the same height as her and had no clue how to dance, but was pretty chuffed when she took his hand and showed him how to twist. Quite sure he would not be missed, Remus slipped between the throngs of people in search of Darius. There must have been 100 witches and wizards in attendance, some of them teachers at Hogwarts, who Remus did everything to avoid. He heard at least 3 people murmur that Dumbledore was there, somewhere. "They're both blacks, you know," he heard one witch whispering to her friend as they watched a dromedary and Sirius giggling hysterically by the record player. "She's run off and had a baby with that Tonks chap, and the boy, well, he was the heir, but I've heard that Orion is planning to contest it as soon as their younger boy is of age. Quite the little hell-raiser from what I've heard. He can't be any worse than Orion was. I went to school with him. Nasty, vicious kid. Sirius is a ray of sunshine in compared to Orion. And don't get me started on that bitch Walpurga." "Shh," the first witch said nervously. "You never know who's listening these days, even at the Potters." "Well, what's he doing here at all, I'd like to know." "He's chums with the Potter boy. You know what Effie and Monty are like. They've taken in the Pettigrew's eldest too. She's over there." "Yes, I heard about that." "Well, it's no secret why she's here. The Pettigrews and the Potters are both pureblood after all, despite the rumours. Mind you, Effie might want to act quickly. If Philomena sees her chance to bag the black heir, then poor James isn't going to get a look in, is he? I mean, everybody knows what's going on. We all need to pick a side. The Potters picked theirs a long time ago, I'm afraid." Remus felt his blood boil. It was horrible, hearing his friends spoken about like that, and the Potters, who Remus was absolutely certain had no ulterior motives when it came to their son, or the company he kept. They let James be friends with him, after all, knowing exactly what he was. He clenched his fists, wished he was allowed to do magic, do anything to shut up those old mean bitches. Sirius and Andromeda were now bawling at the top of their lungs, joined by James and Philomena. "Well, I wish it could be Christmas every day." Remus smiled, and at the same moment finally caught sight of Darius. The old man was steaming drunk now, leaning heavily on the banister in the hallway, and talking to an old woman who looked like she would very much like to get away from him. Remus straightened his back and consciously smoothed his features. He'd borrowed a set of James's smart dress robes for the occasion, and Philomena had kindly performed a cosmetic spell on his scars. As such, he hoped that he'd get away with at least appearing to be the son of a famous wizard, rather than a muggle brat from a children's home. "Good evening, Mr. Barebones," he said, affecting an accent learnt from 3 years of listening to James and Sirius's received pronunciation. He held out a hand to the old man, who shook it, looking puzzled. "Remus Lupin. You remember, we met last year." "Ah, yes, the Lupin boy." "That's right." Remus nodded, smiling serenely, keeping his expression controlled. He handed Darius another whiskey, as the witch the old man had previously been talking to snuck away. "I believe you knew my father." "Lyle Lupin, best jeweller I ever knew. Married a muggle somewhere in Wales, didn't he?" "That's right," Remus said steadily. "My mother." He took a careful breath as Darius guzzled more whiskey, then cleared his throat. "Did you know Lyle very well?" He found that Lyle was much easier to say than my father. "Oh, quite well, quite well." Darius nodded enthusiastically, thrilled to have someone to talk to. "Worked under him at the ministry before all the trouble started. Never knew anyone better with boggarts or dementors, come to that. The Azkaban liaison office has missed him, I can tell you." "The trouble?" Remus asked, swiping another glass of whiskey from Gully, who hurried past with a tray, and handed it to the old man. "Thank you, dear boy. Yes, the trouble. Nasty business, nasty." "You were talking about the events that led to Lyle's suicide." He couldn't say it. Darius had to say it. "I'm talking about the damned werewolves." Darius slammed his empty whiskey glass down on a nearby sideboard. "Forgive me," he muttered. "Not at all," Remus replied unblinkingly. "Do go on. I know the story, of course, but I'd like to hear about it from someone who knew him." Darius surveyed him carefully through his whiskey-addled haze. He seemed to slump slightly before beginning his story. "We couldn't possibly know, you understand. None of us. Well, Lyle was a great wizard, you hear me?" he slurred. Remus nodded. "But," the old man looked upwards, glassy-eyed, "well, he did have a tendency to obsess over things. And that temper flew into rages at work, during committee hearings even." "Committee hearings?" Remus almost broke character. "Hasn't your mother told you?" Darius looked at him, surprised. "Bloody muggles, not fit to raise our children. I've said it for years," he sighed. "Your father was on several committees at the Ministry for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures." Remus was glad he had taken care of magical creatures, otherwise he might know nothing at all about this. As it was, he was able to nod knowingly. Darius continued. "Just his area, of course. He was a giant in the field, but he liked his own way. And he was seen as a bit of an extremist in those days. Wanted to overhaul the werewolf registry. Better identification and tracking measures. We just didn't have the manpower for it, and resources were better spent elsewhere. And Lupin, he'd been working with dark creatures for so many years. He thought he saw werewolves everywhere, always saw danger, where there clearly wasn't any. Honestly, we all thought he was an eccentric. We couldn't have known. When they brought Greyback in, I was there. I saw him. And I don't mind telling you, none of us thought he was a threat. Clearly drunk, confused, a vagrant, that's what we thought. And when Lupin went off on one of his rants about werewolves, well, we didn't think twice." "You let Greyback go," Remus said stonily. Darius looked very sorry for himself now, almost weepy. He nodded. "We let him go. Of course now we know. If only we'd listened. Lyle killed himself just after that. Didn't even want to hear the committee's apology." He sighed and looked at Remus again. "I've always wondered what drove him to it, you know. Some say it was the guilt, not being able to stop Greyback. I wouldn't have thought he was the type. And to abandon his family like that. I mean, you couldn't have been much more than a baby." 5, Remus said. "I was 5. "Yes, well," Darius shiffed uncomfortably, looking morosely down at his empty glass. "I have my own little theory about what happened. What if Greyback came after him, We know how dangerous he is now. We know he hates wizards more than anything else. And your father said some very unpleasant things. So what I wonder is, did Greyback go back and get him? Did he bite him? Is that what happened then? I must say, I don't blame Lyle at all. Only good beast's a dead beast." Remus replied, feeling very hot and a bit dizzy. And Greyback?" "Last I heard, he's in league with you-know-who." Darius shook his head. "And the damned irony of it all is that we need your father more than ever. Still," he smiled at Remus kindly, "don't think he died in vain, dear boy. We did end up implementing a lot of his reforms, particularly where half-breeds are concerned. Can't escape the registry now. No, sir." He slammed his wizened old fist down. "Excuse me." Remus turned quickly. He had heard enough. "I hear Mrs. Potter calling. He slipped back into the crowd of merrymakers, the music still blaring as Sirius and Andromedae led everyone in chorus. Chapter 52, 3rd Year, Confidence. Saturday the 5th of January, 1974. Sheets of rain battered against the Hogwarts Express like a volley of enemy arrows, covering the usually green hillsides in a gauzy veil of mist and drizzle, darkening the sky. "Feels rubbish going back to school, doesn't it?" Sirius said sulkily, glaring out the window. Remus glanced over at Peter, who was staring at Sirius in disbelief. Sirius didn't notice. Remus sighed. "How was your Christmas, Pete?" he asked politely. "Okay," Peter replied dully. "Thanks for the sweets." "Seen my broom?" James asked, pulling it down from the luggage rack. Peter got up to look, perking up a bit. Remus rolled his eyes and returned to his book. He wasn't really reading it. He hadn't been able to concentrate properly on a book since the Potter's Christmas party. In fact, he hadn't been able to concentrate on anything at all. Not flying, or games, or conversations, or James and Sirius's animagus planning. So he pretended to read, hoping they'd leave him to it. At St. Edmund's, he might have just sulked off by himself into town, but that didn't seem like a very good way to show gratitude to James's parents, who were sure to worry. It was as if there was a list of questions in his head that he had no way of getting answers to, so they just played on repeat, around and around. Where was Greyback now? Who was you-know-who? Had Lyle Lupin hated his own son that much? Remus had already known that his father had killed himself because he'd been bitten. He'd always assumed that Lyle had been motivated by guilt, but now, well, what if Remus had been wrong? What if the real reason had been hatred? Or even worse, shame? For the past 3 years, Remus had been working hard at school, using his father's wand and taking the subjects his father might have taken. He didn't think about Lyle all the time, but in the back of his mind, it had still meant something. Since the Christmas party, he wasn't so sure anymore. Ferrex had said, "Know thyself," but Remus was failing to see the wisdom in that now. He'd been much happier not knowing. These dark thoughts were interrupted by a quiet tapping on the carriage door. Marlene poked her head around. "Hiya, McKinnon," James grinned. "Evan's with you?" No," she squeaked, fiddling her hair nervously. "Sirius, can I talk to you?" "Me?" Sirius sat up, looking confused. What is it?" Mary asked me to tell you something." "Tell me what?" I don't think I was supposed to say this in front of this lot." Okay." Sirius got up and followed her outside the corridor. The other three exchanged amused looks while they waited. Ugh, Remus thought. Had he been mistaken about the Mary and Sirius thing? Was it Sirius and Marlene now? Moments later, a stunned-looking Sirius re-entered the compartment alone. "Well?" James asked. "Mary's got a boyfriend, apparently," Sirius said, confused. "You mean you got dumped?" "I dunno." He sat down, scratching his head. "Was I going out with her?" "Well, apparently she thought you were." "Why don't girls just say what they mean?" Sirius ran his hand through his hair in a good imitation of James, who nodded in a sympathetic way. "Girls are a nightmare," he agreed. Remus celebrated inwardly. Thank goodness all of that was behind them. Sunday, 6th of January, 1974. He later learnt that Mary had started going out with a muggle boy she knew from home. "We grew up in the same block," she confided in him excitedly. "His flat's just across from mine. I properly fancied Sirius. He's nice and everything. But, well, he's a bit posh. I don't think he even knows what a council flat is." Remus had to agree on that one. As for himself, he warmed to Mary once again, and didn't even mind her going on and on about her new boyfriend. and how he'd taken her to the local dance hall, and the pictures, and how her mum loved him, and her dad thought he was a good boy. Marlene, however, looked terminally bored as they sat around the fire doing their last bits of holiday homework together. This didn't escape Mary's notice. "Don't be jealous, Marls." "I'm not," Marlene frowned. "I just think you're being horrible to Sirius." "What?" "Dumping him like that. You hurt his feelings." Marlene's cheeks had turned an uncharacteristic shade of pink. "No, she didn't," Remus snorted. Both girls glared at him, as if he'd completely misunderstood. "Oh my God," Mary stared at her friend. "Marlene, do you fancy Sirius?" "No!" Marlene stood up, bright red now. "Oh, you're such a bitch, Mary." She stormed up to the girls' dorm. Lily sighed, glancing up. "That wasn't very nice," she said reproachfully. "Her problem, not mine." Mary shrugged. "Does she fancy Sirius?" "Does it matter?" "I'm going to." Remus stood up, trying not to heave a sigh. "Oh no, don't go, Remus," Mary said. "We'll stop talking about boys, I promise." "I'm tired," he lied. "And I've finished mine. See you tomorrow." As he walked away, he heard Mary whisper very loudly, "Oh my God, maybe he fancies Marls." Remus reminded himself that he was trying to like Mary again, and didn't react. He climbed the stairs and went to sit in the dorm room alone. James, Peter and Sirius were all in detention for a prank they had pulled before Christmas. He wasn't tired at all. It was 2 nights before the full moon, and he was beginning to feel the usual telltale relentlessness in his limbs, the familiar quickening of his heartbeat. Left to his own devices, Remus returned to the troubling thoughts that had been bothering him for weeks. Again, they just seemed to swirl through his brain in a big soupy mess, without beginning or end. Did all wizards feel the same way as Darius? As Lyle Lupin? Were his father's actions really justifiable? Remus couldn't ignore the fact that his mother had also abandoned him, which had to mean something. His friends certainly hadn't treated him any differently after finding out. But then, how could anyone truly know what their friends thought about them? The Marauders liked anything dangerous. Perhaps sharing a room with Remus was simply another exciting risk. What he really needed was to speak to someone impartial. James was so lucky, having 2 parents always willing to listen. Sirius was lucky to have James. Remus wasn't sure if Peter had problems or not. Probably did. Probably told James too. There was McGonagall. Remus knew that they were supposed to go to her with their problems, but she was so stern and difficult, and she liked James best anyway. Madame Pomfrey, of course. She'd been supportive before, but she wasn't one to let you feel sorry for yourself. She just tried to come up with a common-sense solution, or else tell him not to worry so much. Then Dumbledore, but Remus had no idea how to talk to him, and he wasn't even sure he wanted to. As far as people who knew the complexities of Remus's problem, there was also Professor Firox. Remus was 95% sure he knew, anyway. He pondered this as an option. Remus felt a sort of identifiable kingship with his care of magical creatures professor. He had a very reassuring presence, and Remus thought he might feel better if he could speak to him. Somehow sure that Firox would lend a sympathetic ear. There was a funny flutter in his stomach, like excitement, and Remus thought that was a good sign. He glanced at the clock in the corner. It was only 5 o'clock. The other boys wouldn't be out of detention until 6, and curfew wasn't until 8. Remus pulled the Marauders map from under his pillow. The basic outline of the castle was complete now. They just needed to finalise the grounds, animate the staircases, and add the secret places that only they knew about. Then, Sirius's tagging idea would come next, though they still weren't very sure how to go about it. Remus had discovered one spell that would locate a single person, but nothing of the magnitude they required. Still, he cast his locator spell now, and found that Professor Firox was walking from the Great Hall to the staff room. Remus got up quickly. If he was fast, then he could make it look like a chance encounter. He grabbed James's cloak before leaving, just in case Mary and Lily were still in the common room. He was just reaching for the doorknob when he had a sudden flash of sense. What on earth was he doing? Going to see Professor Ferox? And then what? Whinge to him about his dead father? Cry to him about how nobody would ever understand him because he was a murderous dark creature with working-class accent? Moan about how his friends were all going girl-mad and he felt left behind? Remus retreated back into the room. What on earth would Ferox think of him? He was a big wuss, that's what. You couldn't just go crying to teachers whenever something bothered you. You couldn't just expect everyone to feel sorry for you. No one owes you a happy life, Matron always said. He lay on his bed and stared up at the canopy. He felt worse now. He didn't know what had come over him. He was never normally one to act on impulse. Not anymore. Not since his first year. He just felt so strongly that he ought to see his teacher. Ah! There it was again, that flutter in his midsection. It wasn't excitement at all. It was... well, he wasn't sure yet what it was. He felt hot and flushed and oddly prickly. It was something animal. Oh God! Remus let out a groan. It must be the transformation. The wolf was creeping in earlier than usual, maybe. It probably liked the smell of Ferox. Or it caught the scent of his Kneazle. Did wolves eat cats? Only good beast's a dead beast. That was what Darius had told him. At the time, Remus had felt it was a little unfair. After all, he'd never actually hurt anyone. Dumbledore wouldn't let that happen. He definitely didn't want to hurt anyone, either. Except occasionally Snape. And that was just normal, wasn't it? Perhaps Remus was more dangerous than he thought he was. He'd learnt to control his temper most of the time. He'd learnt to control his magic. He just had to learn to control whatever this was, too. When James, Sirius and Peter returned, Remus had made up his mind. I've had a think, he started. No wonder you needed to lie down, Sirius smirked. Remus threw a pillow at him. Piss off, I'm serious. No, I'm serious. James slapped him over the head. Shut up, Black. Thanks. Remus smiled. The whole animagus thing. Yeah? Sirius looked eager now, still rubbing his head. Had an idea? I love moony ideas. Not exactly. Remus felt awkward now. Still, it had to be done. He'd made a decision. I don't want you to do it. Do what? Peter looked confused. He doesn't want us to become animagi, James said, looking at Remus with those clear, honest eyes. Is that right? Remus nodded, feeling horribly guilty. I'm really grateful, I am. I don't think any of you would really understand how dangerous it would be. I could hurt you. I could kill you. I've got no control over it. But it's going to work, Sirius protested. I did all the research. James, did you show him? Leave it, mate, James said. It's Lupin's decision. Thanks. Remus smiled at James. He felt terrible letting them down, but it was for their own good, and he had to be the mature one. Sirius looked like he wanted to say something else, but James gave him a hard look that was so like Mrs. Potter that it silenced the shorter boy at once. They didn't say much for the rest of the evening, and Remus had to pretend to read his book again. Later that night, after lights out, Remus heard Sirius creep over to James's bed and cast the silencing spell for the first time in a long time. He wished they would invite him, just once. He wished he wasn't always the one left out. He wished he knew how it felt to have a friend as close as James. More than ever, he wanted someone to talk to. Suddenly overwhelmed, Remus quickly cast his own spell, so the others wouldn't hear him crying. Chapter 53, 3rd Year. Davy Gudgeon. Winter passed into spring, and as per usual, Remus's birthday was celebrated with creative vigour by the other marauders. The customary singing at every mealtime, the cake, presents. Unfortunately, McGonagall was wise to their antics this year, and had a prefect watching the boys' dorms to prevent any further midnight firework displays. Fortunately, Remus's 14th fell on a Hogsmeade weekend, and he felt very grown up indeed, spending the afternoon in the Three Broomsticks with his friends. It soon became clear that James and Sirius had somehow bribed all of their classmates to stop by the pub too, as a steady stream of students approached their table, wanting to buy Remus a butterbeer or toast to his health. By the time the afternoon was over, everyone in the bar knew Remus's name, and he was raucously cheered on his way out. Completely embarrassing, of course. With his birthday out of the way, Remus threw himself into revision and preparation for upcoming exams. He had a particular urge to do well in his new subjects, not least care of magical creatures. By returning his focus to study and schoolwork, Remus slowly began to put the cruel words of Darius Barebones behind him. Yes, he was dangerous. And yes, once everyone found out what Remus was, he would likely be shunned. But until then, he had an opportunity to learn, and he wasn't going to waste it. Sunday, the 7th of April, 1974. Remus had never met Davy Gudgeon before, as far as he knew, nor had any of the others. He never found out what the kid looked like even, but he would remember that name until the day he died. The Whomping Willow had been turned into a game during the summer of 1973 by a group of bored first years, and though it was abhorred by Filch and frowned upon by the heads of houses, no one had really said anything about it. Try to see how close you could get to the trunk before the branches took a swipe at you. Remus certainly had no inclination to play. He hated that tree. As it was, Remus wasn't even there when it happened. It was the day after the full moon, and he was in the hospital wing as per usual. Peter was sitting on the floor, sorting through his chocolate frog cards, murmuring to himself happily. James was marking Sirius's divination homework, and Sirius was covertly flicking his wand at James behind his back, turning his hair different colours for Remus's amusement. Blue, pink, green, yellow. It was working too. Remus found it hysterically funny, because James looked so serious, and when he was concentrating his tongue poked out between his teeth like a cat. It was a perfectly pleasant afternoon, and Remus could almost ignore how much his bones and teeth hurt as they settled back into place for another cycle. But then it happened. The hospital door slammed open, and a student came in shrieking, "Madam Pomfrey, help!" Nosy as they were, Sirius and James jumped down from the bed to peer around the pale green curtains. Remus sighed, leaning back on his pillow. He was accustomed now to the ebb and flow of the hospital wing. Raised voices like that usually meant a spell gone wrong. He tried to ignore it. He resented anything that reminded him that he was in a hospital, and not just enjoying a lazy afternoon with his friends. But James and Sirius remained out of view, watching whatever the scene was unfold, and when they turned back towards their beds, their faces were pale and serious. The commotion had grown louder. Remus was dimly aware of someone crying. "What is it?" he asked, more irritably than he meant to. Sirius's mouth twisted, and James shook his head mutely, pushing his glasses up his nose. Peter finally looked up from his cards. "What?" "An accident. Some kid," James murmured. "Everyone out!" Madame Pomfrey's voice echoed through the chamber, unnaturally loud and clear. The curtain around Remus's bed parted, and she poked her head through, looking distracted. "Remus, dear, if you're feeling well enough, it might be best for you to spend the rest of the afternoon in your own bed. Potter, would you go and fetch Professor Sprout? Tell her that one of her students has been injured." James nodded and left immediately, without even glancing back at his friends or his homework. You could always rely on James. Sirius caught Remus's eye, and Remus nodded his assent, climbing out of bed. He was still in his pyjamas, and Sirius hoiked Peter up by the elbow to give him some privacy. Remus dressed as quickly as he could, shoved his books into his bag, grabbed James's work, and joined his friends on the other side of the curtain. He could smell blood. Curtains had been drawn around the bed nearest the door, and the three boys hurried past it, wanting nothing more than to escape the unpleasant atmosphere and to get as far away as possible. They went straight to the common room, Remus limping slightly, Sirius and Peter slowing down to match his pace. "What was it?" Remus whispered. "There was blood." "Yeah," Sirius replied, looking shaken. "I don't know what happened, but it was his face." Peter looked faintly ill. They reached the common room, and Remus collapsed into an armchair, exhausted. "You okay?" Sirius asked, anxiously, touching a hand to Remus's shoulder. Remus nodded, closing his eyes and breathing deeply. Fine. He shrugged Sirius off, embarrassed, wishing he could be normal for once. "All right, lads." Mary sauntered into the room, Marlene in tow. "Hear what happened to that gudgeon kid?" "No," Sirius replied slyly. "What?" "Whacked in the face by that mental tree," she said, shaking her cloak off. "They were trying to touch the trunk." "The Whomping Willow?" "Yeah," Marlene piped up. "It shouldn't be allowed. It's so dangerous." "Did you see it happen?" Remus asked, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. "Nope," Mary shrugged, flinging herself down on the couch next to Sirius. "Heard it from one of the second-year girls." "They'll have to get rid of it," Marlene said shrilly. "Dumbledore can't leave it there now. Someone could be killed." "He should have stayed away from it," Sirius said, frowning. "It's a stupid game. Everyone knows what that tree's like." "Have I gone mad?" Mary laughed. "Sirius Black, the voice of reason." "Piss off, MacDonald." Sirius scowled. Remus was starting to get a headache. He rubbed his temple and closed his eyes again, shrinking down into the armchair. Guilt creeped up his spine, hot and cold pinpricks. It hit him in the face. Would this gudgeon boy be okay? Surely Madame Pomfrey would be able to fix it, whatever it was. She could fix anything. Gossip about Davy Gudgeon flooded the school in a matter of hours, until no one could escape it. Sarah Saunders from Ravenclaw told everyone that she'd seen his parents arrive, then marched straight to Dumbledore's office, looking furious. Gudgeon's friends in Hufflepuff relayed the story over and over for anyone who listened, and it had seemed as though Davy would actually reach the trunk this time. But then the willow lashed out at the very last minute. They heard varying accounts of the damage, that the tree had cracked his skull in two, that he had lost both eyes, or even that he had actually died and the school was covering it up. Marlene, who seemed more distressed than anyone about the whole thing, enlisted Lily and Mary's help in drawing up a petition to have the Whomping Willow removed from the school premises. Remus signed it. He couldn't think of a good enough reason not to. Sirius refused. "That tree has just as much right to be here as anyone," he said firmly, as Marlene chased him with a quill. "But Sirius," she pleaded, "it's dangerous." "So are bludgers," he returned, dodging her. "You going to leave the Quidditch team?" "It's hardly the same thing." "Ugh, just sign it, Black," Lily groaned, trying to finish her runes homework. "What's it to you?" "It's the principal." He crossed his arms firmly. Lily rolled her huge green eyes. "Tosser," she muttered under her breath. "Can't he see how upset Miles is?" "Why is she so upset?" Remus asked in a whisper, when Marlene was out of earshot. "Did she know Davy?" "Don't think so," Lily sighed. "I think she just wants a project to take her mind off stuff at home. Family, you know." Remus thought about this. He didn't know Marlene as well as he'd got to know Lily and Mary. Mary was so outgoing and would chat to anyone. In fact, if anything, she was a bit of an oversharer, Remus far too much about her snogging preferences for his liking. Marlene had always been the quieter, shyer one, less sure of herself, even in the areas she excelled. He didn't know very much about her family, simply because it never occurred to him to ask about people's families. He didn't think the petition would really go anywhere. Dumbledore had given a speech prohibiting anyone from going near the Whomping Willow again, and that was all that was said on the matter. The staff were clearly uneasy, and Remus had just been trying to keep his head down. The other marauders hadn't said anything to him about it, and changed the subject whenever it came up. Usually, Remus preferred not to discuss anything related to his little furry problem. But now he was beginning to wonder whether they secretly blamed him after all. James would never say it out loud, of course. Peter might. Sirius might say so, and then instantly take it back. Either way, none of them said a word, leaving Remus's imagination to run wild. A week after the incident, Professor Sprout confirmed the rumour. Davy Gudgeon was now blind, and would not be returning to Hogwarts for quite some time. Remus had been trying to avoid Sprout since it happened. As herbology teacher, he was sure that she knew exactly what the Whomping Willow was doing on the grounds in the first place. His parents are taking him to America. There are advances being made in ocular healing potions, the dumpy professor explained at breakfast. I am sure Davy and his family are very grateful for all of your well wishes. Remus felt a horrible sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. When Marlene, Lily and Mary and a few other students got up to present their petition, which had over 400 signatures now, Remus went with them. Professor Sprout accepted the petition and promised to discuss the matter with Dumbledore. She even awarded Marlene 10 house points for her efforts. They're not going to get rid of it, though, Sirius said later that evening when the marauders were all alone in their room. No, I doubt it. Remus kicked a stray sock under his bed, hands in his pockets. So, why did you go up? Remus shrugged. Felt like the right thing to do. I mean, Marlene's right, the tree's dangerous. Shouldn't be at school. But, Peter started. I know, Remus snapped. I know, okay? You shouldn't feel guilty, mate, James said kindly. Gudgeon shouldn't have been mucking around like that. It's not your fault. If it's anyone's fault, Remus said darkly, then it's mine. That's stupid, Sirius said bluntly, shaking his head. You didn't plant it, did you? I don't know if it's escaped anyone else's attention, but this school is not exactly safety conscious. It's built next to a bloody forest full of creatures more dangerous than a flipping tree. There's supposed to be a literal monster lying dormant somewhere directly below us, and, not being funny, but have you seen Hagrid? What's your point, Black? Remus sighed heavily, sitting down. His hip hurt if he stood up for too long. He was getting to be like an old woman. I don't know, Sirius shrugged. Shit happens. Don't blame yourself. Stop moping. Moping? Remus growled, his temperature rising. Fuck off. There's a kid who can't see because I'm too dangerous to be at school. Try telling Marlene what I am. I bet she'd get a lot more signatures on that petition. You are not dangerous. You don't know what I am, Remus hissed. You're our friend, James said suddenly. Remus stared at him. It was a stupid, soppy, dramatic thing to say. But that was half the problem with James. He so embodied those unrealistic values of loyalty, justice and honour that he forced you to believe in them too. He sat next to Remus on the bed. You're our friend, and that's the most important thing, okay? He met Remus's glare and stared back, smiling. Okay, he said. Remus continued to glare, and James inched closer so that their knees knocked together. Okay, he said, leaning forward now, his nose centimetres from Remus. Remus knew this tactique. James did the same thing sometimes to cheer Sirius up. He never blinked. It was highly unnerving. And finally Remus laughed, ducking away. Okay. James laughed too and threw his arms around Remus. Thank goodness, we couldn't lose you, Moony, he cried. Suddenly Sirius and Peter followed suit, piling onto Remus, who found himself at the bottom of a very giggly scrum. Laughing, despite himself, Remus tried to squirm out from under them. Get off me, you bunch of poofs. Ah, you love us really. Sirius patted his head. End of chapter 53.